So I've heard people say things to me like, well, near-death experiences, that's exactly what DMT does, or other psychedelic drugs. Some have said ketamine, and I've interviewed people who have had near-death experiences who have also had psychedelic drug experiences who have told me it's not the same. And in particular, the vividness, the reality of it is of an order of magnitude different. Now, having said that, like we talked about, I think it's possible that, psychedelic drugs are called gateway drugs sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. There was an interesting experiment done. It wasn't really an experiment. It was a doctor, Dr. Walter Penfield, in the 50s, I believe it was the 50s, worked on epileptic patients and would basically open their brain, and while they were lucid, would stimulate parts of the brain with electrodes trying to cure epilepsy. And he kind of mapped the brain in doing that. But what he found is he would stimulate across an area and their left arm would go up and they would say, "I'm not doing that, you're doing that," which completely changed Dr. Penfield's view, because he went from believing that the brain was who we are to realizing there's a someone in there that can observe something completely separate from what's happening in the brain. But Penfield also found a spot where he put electrodes across the brain, and the person said, "I'm leaving my body." And then when he stopped, would come back. Now, I don't know for sure, but I wonder if there's like a trigger in our brain where our soul can release from our body. And so at a point of near-death trauma, or maybe that is the passing of death, at least of the soul leaving the body, that something happens that is a release mechanism. And so do psychedelic drugs actually affect that? In the sense that your soul maybe is traveling or going somewhere or experiencing some things of a greater dimensionality of reality around us. I think that could be possible. The problem is that you're going into another realm unprotected. Mm-hmm. And when I've interviewed near-death experiencers, one of the common things they've said to me is that when they're there, they're out of their bodies, and generally either angels or what they call a welcoming committee, relatives or friends who have died before them, are there to greet them. They say, love them and guide them on their journey home and protect them. And like Dr. Mary Neal was the spine surgeon whose kayak got pinned under the waterfall, dead for 30 minutes, mm-hmm. And she said, "I knew they were there to protect me." And I said, "Protect you from what?" And she said, "I don't know. I just intuitively knew they were there to protect me." And enough said that it registered for me. And so what I wonder is, if we are through psychedelics going into, and there are other ways, to shut down the neocortex as well and have altered experiences of consciousness or awareness. Maybe you are going into a realm of other dimensionalities all around us. But the thing you got to be aware of is that there's good and there's evil in this world. There's good and there's evil on the other side too. And so you don't always know what you're going to encounter. And if you're going in unprotected, as the NDEs would kind of hint at, you can be deceived. So let me go though to I've interestingly recently had a firefighter who came to faith in Christ in our church, who, went through tons of abuse growing up, a lot of trauma, then becomes a firefighter, first responder. So there's a lot of trauma there. And he was recently telling me about doing therapy in a controlled setting with psilocybin, and that it really helped him. I also, a woman who also came to faith in our church, who had undergone severe sexual abuse trauma. Same kind of story. And I have a good friend who is a Christian therapist. I told you he runs affairrecovery.com. It's the largest affair recovery network, and he serves the military. And so he deals with a ton of trauma. And he said there are multiple therapies that can get at reintegrating a memory that's a traumatic memory with our neocortex, so that you can put new thoughts, new context to that memory. Because if memory is stored in a neural network, and if it's a traumatic memory, many times for survival, it shuts off from our neocortex, where most of our daily thinking is being done. So you couldn't make it in a constant traumatized state, right? And so that's the brain's way of protecting us from constant trauma. But then when it gets triggered by something, you're just there, and there's no way to associate it with a new thought. Like if you were a kid growing up just being beaten on by your father, or sexually traumatized, and you felt, I'm never safe or whatever. And you get this thought associated. When that trauma comes up, it's just pure terror. You're feeling the same thing again. But if that can somehow be reconnected to your neocortex, you can start to associate new thoughts with it. I'm an adult now. I'm not helpless. Not everyone that looks like that or does that is going to harm me. And so it can begin to reintegrate that memory with a new perspective.
I had a conversation with a good friend of mine last week, who also is a special ops veteran and found a lot of healing through psychedelic therapy, and then found God or strengthened his belief in God through psychedelic therapy. And we got into an interesting discussion about, whether it's a sin to do or not. And a lot of people have told me this is the forbidden fruit. This is satanic. This is all kinds of negative things. All the things that I've seen happen from psychedelic therapy are positive. I've seen very few when it's in the right setting, when you're doing it with the right intent.
Yeah, like my therapist friend said, like some are more effective than others. Like psilocybin, if you have to maintain a microdose, you have to keep to feel good. Well, then that's not complete healing. That doesn't mean there can't be some healing, but of course the goal is to not have to be dependent. But look, I don't speak for the Christian community. I'm sure this will not so far go over well. I'm just telling you what I somewhat recently heard. And, I've thought about it like, well, there are a lot of dangerous drugs that are used in medicine. When controlled, that can be very helpful. But when abused, can be harmful. And so might these be some that have not yet been, found to be useful in a controlled way? Ketamine. Ketamine can be abused, right? But I have a friend right now undergoing trauma therapy using ketamine, and it's legal, and it's okay in a medical setting. So I don't know. I mean, maybe,
It's
I'm
interesting.
out of my lane here, by the way.
Yeah, I'm being, you're very respected in what you're doing. So that's why I'm asking, is because I don't, it's a touchy subject, but
It is.
I'm interested to hear your opinions. And, so we got into this discussion and he was saying that he thinks, and I don't want to drag on this too long, but he thinks there are certain sections of the Bible that have been pulled throughout the years. One of them is he thinks that self-healing through things like mushrooms or ibogaine, iboga, ayahuasca. He thinks that maybe there have been sections out of that have been pulled because it is a direct connection, he believes, to God. And I'm kind of curious what
I don't think I would go there because I know people who have had hellish trips and many who have had trips that started good and everything was good and they kept going because it was so awesome until it wasn't.
Well, there is a caveat to that, and some people, I'm not saying that the trips are all beautiful and glorious and blissful by any means. All I'm saying is they are healing. In fact, a lot of people have had horrific experiences, but then the long-term effects kick in, and it's like I was telling you, I haven't drank in over 2 years. Stanford just wrapped up a study where they brought guys down with traumatic brain injuries, where half of the brain isn't lit up, dark spots all over the brain. They do the ibogaine treatment. They fly right back immediately. They do another brain scan, and the entire brain's lit up. There's a lot of science coming out of it, and it makes me wonder. You've heard this story about the guy. He was in a flood and he's on his roof and the water's coming and they send a boat and he's like, no, Jesus is going to save me. And then they send a helicopter and he's like, no, I'm not getting on that helicopter. Jesus is going to save me. And then they send something else and he says, no, Jesus is going to save me. And the water keeps rising. He winds up drowning. He goes to heaven and he's like, why didn't you save me? And he's like, I sent you a boat, I sent you a helicopter, and I sent you the other thing. Maybe psychedelics is one of those things.
Well, I mean, it could be. God, if God created all there is, he also created things that can help us and heal us. Paul says in the Bible, everything created is good. Everything God created is good. Now, can we abuse just about everything? Yeah. Right? We can use good things in ways that do us or others harm. But, I'm not saying that, our modern medicine might not one day say, hey, a treatment using something like this can be helpful in a limited dose. And, gosh, I had someone in our church who had been on the streets, a meth addict for 10 years. He came to faith in my small group with his living girlfriend. He met in recovery. I married them both for 10 years. They were awesome, completely clean, no alcohol, no drugs. They served. He served in our homeless ministry. She served our kids. And then he started working on houses, falls off a ladder, goes in, and without asking, they start giving him opioids. He gets addicted again to opioids and ends up dead.
Oh, man.
So not even everything that we do in modern medicine that's safe is safe or done in a safe way.
Yeah.
So, I think one of the problems you asked me, kind of why do Christians shoot at it? Well, sometimes we shoot at things we don't know, don't understand, because it rattles us. And I think a better approach is to listen. That's what I'm trying to do right now. Is I've got these people that I trust that are telling me, that this has been very helpful. But But at the same time, I think, there's a word of warning too, that you can become addicted to other things, that you trade one problem for another. And so, I think what my firefighter friend and, and my psychotherapist friend both said is, in a guided situation, in a guided healing situation, it can be effective, but unguided, not necessarily.